well, we're going to get started. My name is Craig Johnson. I'm with the Tenio Group. Welcome for everybody who's coming here and enjoying this afternoon. Hopefully we'll have some good talks and then some discussion about some nice bourbon in the second hour. So the process for today is going to be, we're going to get started now. I'm going to make an introduction for the panelists. And then we're going to open up, we're going to have the conversation. Everybody's mics are going to be open. So if you want to talk or ask a question, please feel free. We've got a couple guys that can talk for at least an hour on their own without question and keep you intrigued in the entire conversation. But we do want to have some questions and answers, and we'll go from there. Around 4:30. We will be joined by one of the master brewers. I don't even think they call him master brewer, right? From the Garrison Brothers Distillery, and then we can discuss the alcohol from there, the bourbon from there. So welcome aboard again. My name is Craig Johnson. We've got two guys that we're going to be talking. Hopefully they'll wave their hands if you're on there. First one is Brian Linder. Brian Linder is from Checkpoint. He is responsible for what they call Beyond the Perimeter.
Hey, guys.
And so what we'll be talking with him about is mobile and endpoint and things that are beyond the perimeter, based on how we're seeing COVID. But we'll start with a couple conversations. And again, if you have some questions, please ask. And then in the middle of that time, we're sort of going to transfer over to Grant Asplund. Grant and I knew each other 20 years ago when we both worked at Checkpoint for a while.
Easy now.
And then he went on his merry way and ended up at this company called Dome 9, which then Checkpoint acquired. So he got suckered back in to coming back here. And so with the conversation of Tales of a War Room and Beyond the Perimeter, we are sort of going to be talking about the mobile security, endpoint, end user security, roll into where your data sits or your email sits, and then roll right over into the cloud. And what's so important, why, with the systems being out there, from your end users not being in your local networks anymore and your data not being in your local networks anymore, how do you maintain control and how do you get visibility into that? So we're going to get started unless somebody wants to chime in, and you can just raise your hand, or we've got a person monitoring the chat. You can just stick your question in the chat and we can go from there. So I'll go ahead and get started. The biggest thing that I wanted to start about was with COVID and everybody working from home and people using BYOD devices. Are there really issues with BYOD devices, like your mobile devices and your endpoints, or like your teenagers running on the same laptop that you're trying to do work with, which always scares the daylights out of me. It was funny when we were planning this call, Grant made one of his great Grantisms. He called BYOD. What did you call it again, Grant?
It's most of us know it as bring your own device. But in fact, I think within the IT community, we see it as bring your own disaster.
Yeah. And it's funny because, everybody started getting their email on those systems, and everybody thinks that these mobile devices are really secure and it's the best place to be able to do some work. But we know that the hackers are really focusing on these mobile devices right now. So I'm going to start the conversation by asking Brian a little bit about mobile devices, how they're being integrated and used within this COVID Beyond the Perimeter space, and is there truly issues out there that could be causing problems or being issues with using mobile devices as a endpoint piece for Beyond the Perimeter?
Okay, so let me start by saying that COVID merely, as it did with many things, brought to light what was already a what I'll call a blind spot for most of us. And we already were in bits and pieces allowing people to bring their own devices in and use them and access corporate resources. And I think if you asked anybody, and I know most of the people on this call are savvy, so if you asked anybody, their perspective on allowing a mobile device to access the network, I'm sure they would say it's an important thing to make sure it's secured. Well, In COVID, in Corona time, starting with lockdown and proceeding all the way to current time, the consumption of critical resources inside the company's network has, if not been dominated by these bring your own devices like mobile devices. So the problem is amplified. And the problem is most companies subscribe to what I'll call 3 or 4 myths about it. And it's why I refer to mobile security as one of the biggest blind spots we face. So I'll go through a couple of the myths and you can tear them apart. We can argue about them. First one is that mobile devices don't need security. They're not laptops, so they're simpler devices. False. That they don't need security, and they're simply there's less they're less of a target, which is also false. iOS devices, like Apple devices, your iPhone you're holding in your hand. Some people probably believe that device, no matter what access it has into your network, it's a walled garden of an operating system, so it's fine. That's also false. Some companies fear the discussion, and I'll model that for you. We know that we had to give people access through these mobile devices, so we did, but we're afraid to talk about the possible privacy issues around putting any kind of security control on an employee-owned device. Bring your own device is not the only ownership model. We talk mostly about it because it's the one that people fear the most, which is bring your own device is exactly that. The employee, you, me, we have our own phones we maintain. We have our own Instagram accounts, our own pictures, our own social media, you name it. And then now we're also using it to access corporate devices. There are other ownership models, but that's the scariest one. And most companies don't want to get involved with securing, people's personal devices. So when you put it all together, and on top of all that, you throw the scaling issue. So if I told you that I was going to secure just the CEO's single mobile phone, okay, maybe I can chew on that problem. But when you try to scale this up to thousands of devices or even tens of thousands of devices, there's a fear that there's just no way they could get their arms around it. And that all these things put together form what has to be one of the greatest blind spots in Corona. And later we'll talk about Achilles, we'll talk about the Instagram vulnerability that we discovered and some other things. You mentioned, and if you don't mind, I want to come back to something you said, Craig. So let's try a little something. You don't have to actually participate if you don't want to. You can if you want, but I'm going to ask you a question. What percent we didn't. We participated in a remote work survey that surveyed people like you and me, and we asked them, what percent of people are allowing their family members to touch their corporate devices, not even their bring your own mobile devices, but their corporate devices for schoolwork, gaming, shopping. Anybody want to hazard it? Let's see if anybody will be brave enough to put it into the chat. Can I see the chat here? Let's see. What percent of families in Corona are allowing their kids or to touch their
over 50?
Okay, we got an over 50. Anybody else want to chime in?
I mean, it's got
99. That's awesome. It's like card sharks. Higher, lower. Allowing about 60. So the answer is 21%. About one in 4 families are allowing it, which is very, very disturbing. Okay, number one.
That just means there's somebody lying.
Somebody's lying because they're embarrassed about it.
Not accurately
they're embarrassed
responding
about it.
to the corporate survey.
Exactly.
It's against corporate policy.
Exactly.
Now imagine a bring your own device. Now bring your own device. There's no such limitation. So my kids can use my iPad, and then I take that to access the most confidential resources in the company. So I hope that illustrates the motivation. It amplified the blind spot. Is basically what really came, I think, Craig, of Corona time, and I think it's good and bad because amplified as it is, we're still struggling to keep up with it.
Awesome. You had mentioned Achilles, and I apologize. I should probably know what that is.
Oh no, you're in good company. Don't worry. Nobody
knows what that is.
All right. So I say Achilles, and other than my colleagues on the call, no one's ever heard of it. And I'm going to tell you a story. Okay. So it was worth hearing. Now, you don't have to look too far and this story has a twisted ending. I'm just going to forewarn you. Okay. Now, in the world of mobile, there have been a couple of notable things, notable events that have occurred that some are well known, some aren't. There was a critical vulnerability in the Instagram app that we discovered and we published that could allow somebody using Instagram on their mobile device, which is basically almost everyone, to in short, be compromised to the point where their contacts, their photos could be stolen, the mobile device could be totally compromised. Let's put that aside. Then ransomware has gone mobile. Well, Black Rose Lucy was a malware that overtook and extended ransomware to the mobile device. But let's forget all of that stuff, okay? Because you have what? Zoom fatigue, pandemic fatigue. The other fatigue you have is breach fatigue or ransomware fatigue. And these things happen so frequently that they become expected. They become the norm. Here's one you didn't hear about, or maybe you did. It's called Achilles, okay? Now, back in around the July timeframe, Checkpoint Research, whoever's, if you can mute your phone, that would be awesome. I hear a little, it's almost like scratching. Somebody's doing the DJ thing. They're scratching on the record there. I'll tell you what Achilles was. Back in around the July timeframe, Checkpoint did a responsible disclosure on 400, that's right, 400 vulnerabilities found in a Qualcomm chipset that exists in 40% of the Android devices in the world. Now, right now you're saying, first of all, what does Qualcomm have to do with mobile security? It's the first thing you're saying. The second thing you're saying was 400 vulnerabilities sounds almost made up. I mean, seriously, almost made up. So this is the rub about this. Let me give you a little visual. Bear with me. I'm going to give you a little visual, okay? So you can understand what this is. And I'm going to show you how intractable a problem this is and then why mobile security is such an incredible challenge for us. Stand by a second for the proverbial PowerPoint. Let's go. Can you see what looks like a chip, a Snapdragon chip in the middle? Can you see it? Somebody just say yes if you can see it.
Yes.
Thank you for complying. Let me explain what this is. Raise your hand right at your desk there if you have an Android device. Just raise your hand. No one can see you. The dog can see you. Raise your hand if you have it. Okay, Sal raised his hand. Thank you. Now, Sal, the chances are that since 40% of the world's Android devices, which you can imagine is a very big number, probably includes you. Your odds are pretty good. Includes something called the Qualcomm Snapdragon system on chip. Now, I know your attention span's already drifting away because you don't care about chipsets and Qualcomm. I know it is, but stay with me. This particular chipset has multiple subfunctions, multiple subsystems that you neither care about nor think about. And they all live on this chip. And this chip is programmed at the factory. You don't download patches for it or download fixes for it. It's programmed by a PROM programmer. I mean, don't quiz me on it, but it's done at the chip level and it's put in the phone. It's manufactured by a third-party Qualcomm. Anyway, Checkpoint's research arm disclosed 400 vulnerabilities here that could be exploited to basically completely take over the device. So if you are holding an Android device, let me stop sharing, so enough of that. If you're holding an Android device in your hand right now, if that device is using the Snapdragon chipset, which 40% of the Android devices on the planet are, then attackers could turn your phone into a spying tool without any user interaction. They could render the phone unresponsive. They could root it. They could take over everything, steal your photos, contacts, you name it. It can impersonate you, steal your ID, you name it. Basically, all these activities could become totally stealth, so you wouldn't even know they were happening, and the device basically is a brick. Now, somebody should be saying, here comes Checkpoint to save the day. And I'm actually going to make you laugh right now. There is no fix for 400 vulnerabilities. You cannot patch them. You cannot download a Tuesday patch set and apply it. That's not the way it works in this world and with these vulnerabilities. And you're now saying, well, what am I supposed to do? Go buy a new phone? Okay, that'll take care of it, which literally nobody is going to do. So we talk about a protection we can put on that device to mitigate the risk, because we've reached basically a dead end there. There's no way to patch the vulnerabilities as written, as discovered. What do? Well, we take a solution such as and there's a class of solutions known as mobile threat defense. So write that down, MTD. That's the class of protections that go on the mobile device. Okay, Checkpoint is putting forward the top solution in the space. It's called Sandblast Mobile. There's none better. But to make it short, it requires multiple dimensions, none of which you've ever thought about on a mobile device, because you think about laptop security. Maybe you have a working knowledge of your Sandblast agent running on your laptop, but most people aren't thinking, what does it take to protect a mobile device? But more importantly, and I'll be you now, I'm playing your part. I have my bring your own device right here. Here's my bring your own device. anything the company's putting on there better be completely unintrusive. It better be easy to use. It better be quiet. It better not suck my battery dry. It better not interrupt my work experience, or God forbid, interrupt my pleasurable Instagram or Facebook or photos experience, right? So that is what makes mobile security so much more difficult to get your arms around. It can't be an intrusive experience, or people simply won't cooperate with it. So let me give you a couple of vectors that you implement to protect against, to defend against the possibility of, say, somebody exploiting one of these vulnerabilities. And I'll just be high level with it. First, like things like network protection, the kind of things you'd expect on your laptop also existing on your mobile device at the network level. Anti-phishing, zero phishing, so the ability to detect a phishing link if I click on it. So I open up an email on my mobile device, I click on the link in there unwittingly, it begins an exploitation, but it needs to be blocked, whether we know about that link or whether we don't know about it. Anti-bot and DNS protection, some other things. So the point being, one cannot protect against the Achilles vulnerabilities without buying a new phone, basically. But by deploying a mobile threat defense solution like Sandblast Mobile, we can mitigate the risks associated with it and block any efforts to exploit an attack against the mobile device. So that's just a kind of a high level of the paradox of mobile. And this is all happening while you're sitting there enjoying the personal experience of your mobile device and simultaneously accessing company resources. So I hope that clarified some of the risk there.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I mean, with the COVID space that's happening now, and everybody being forced to the houses, either they took laptops home, either they got connected through a VDI, bring your own disaster system. All these different systems are creating all these new applications. The data is moving out to the cloud. The applications is moving out to the cloud. Reality is, I'm betting that a lot of these companies are probably never even going to open up their brick and mortar environment if they don't have to. Once they realize that they can save $1 million a year, put their data in the cloud, put their applications as a software as a service. But the problem I see is now you've forced the security people to make sure that their endpoints, both mobile and endpoint, are secure. You're forcing the applications to be secure, and then you're forcing the data that may be sitting in the cloud to be secure. Does all this stuff wrap together? I mean, I started adding up one time when Sal and I were just in a meeting with a bank, and we ran through a conversation with them, and there ended up being about 15 different applications that they were running just to protect their environment. Does that give you an area of concern? Should we try to consolidate down some of those things? And this is a question to both of you, Grant and or Brian. If I'm looking at it that I was like, holy cow, even on the endpoint, you may have an antivirus piece, you may have a VPN piece, you may have an agent that communicates and protects your software as a service solutions. I mean, how does that all tie together? And is there?
I'll ask Grant this question. Grant, how many of the people attending the call today have an unlimited amount of security resources to handle the growing sprawl of disparate, siloed security solutions? How many do you think, out of all the people that came today?
While sleeping or during cognitive and
cognitive
awake state? Because in their dreams, maybe half. No one, right? That's the challenge. And I think it's interesting, Craig, I think you're hitting on, look, without any disrespect, it's funny. Before I even got into technology and computers, I sold fishing tackle. Didn't fish, but I sold fishing tackle for a wholesaler. And I bring it up because it was always amazing to me that fisher people, with enthusiasm to go get the big one, are always looking for the hot new lure. I mean, they're up and down those aisles looking for the hot one. But sure enough, it seems like they always go back to the steady Eddie that catches fish. And I think there's some similarities when you look at the landscape of vendors that come up with the really great sex and violence in their UI, but at the end of the day, are they bringing any more efficacy? Are they bringing any more effectiveness? Or are they really just really cool to look at, but a whole new UI to learn, a whole new process to learn? I think we get sucked into that, and now more than ever, we all need to kind of step back and assess the whole landscape, because Brian, as you know, nobody wants to get into my phone. They want the prize, and the prize isn't on my phone. The prize is the data, but my phone's connected like we all are. And that's what I think people have to understand.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick little tidbit, and then we'll roll into a piece of the next question. Next question is that we worked with a city that was living on a flat network, and they were one laptop, or one person gave up their AD credentials. From there, they were able to grow to an AD administrator. From there, they were able to develop a patch and push a patch out to this entire flat network of ransomware. So they brought down an entire city with ransomware because of
one person got compromised. One
credential.
Yeah.
And that credential was traced back to a phone via an Office 365 login. And so that sort of leads me, and that, we sort of led you guys to believe that we were going to talk about tales of the war room. And this is truly one tale that is scary, because the city, because of the ransomware and because their network was flat, because one person gave up one credential, they were not able to bury their dead. They were not able to write tickets. They were not able to charge for water utilities. Luckily enough, they're a city, right? Most cities won't go bankrupt, but they have, some of them. But this was a real concern. So the big question a lot of times that you have is, it's not about, do I have anything that can be lost? The question is, if my entire environment is shut down, how many days does it take me to lose my business? The smaller the business, the faster it happens. And I've seen ransomware hit a few times. So to roll into that, Brian, I'm going to give Grant a few seconds to talk, and then hopefully we'll wrap back everything up together as one big picture. But we talked about the mobile, and we talked about some of the endpoint, about how important it is that the end users are now sitting outside the protection of the locked front door of the network. But the applications, and I'm going to use Office 365 as an example, the applications aren't protected either. And a lot of people are thinking, oh my gosh, and Brian, I know you know something about this, and I know Grant does. Microsoft ATP, and I want to pick on Microsoft because everybody does, but I'm going to do it anyway. Microsoft ATP is what most people depend on when they look at Office 365. Is that acceptable? Is it an issue? And is there a way of protecting, and what are the options for people to protect specifically like an Office 365 space or G Suite?
All right, Grant, I'm going to take this one for about 15 seconds, then if you want to color it as well.
Yeah, no, that's fine. In fact, I'd hand it over to you, because I think that's really, when we talk about SaaS and SaaS security, from our view, I mean, it is the kingpin, what you have to focus on, and it's the tool everybody's using. So.
Okay, so let's just go ahead and be honest about a few things. And I'm going to actually compliment Microsoft. How about that for a shock? Microsoft takes a beat. First of all, they provide the top utilized as a service collaboration platform on the face of the planet. Nobody does it better, and they're growing at an astronomical rate. And in terms of security investment, I think that they do an admirable job as a first level. But I'll share with you a hard statistic, and I don't know if this was talked about before we went live on the broadcast or not, but I'll share with you. Somebody had asked, when you say effective, like Microsoft being approximately effective, I think we have a study here that shows that about 70% of malicious email passing through the front door of Office 365 with what we'll call built-in security, which is what we're referring to here, the Microsoft security components. And I mean all of them deployed, if you can get them all deployed, is about 70% effective. And if you don't like that number, make it 80%, whatever you want to do. But our observation was 70%. So 30% of those malicious emails got through. Let's start with that. Of the 30% that get through, they end up, so that means basically 3 out of 10 of these emails end up in somebody's, in front of someone. How many people trust their users to make a good decision and be able to visibly discern an email as being malicious or not? I don't need you to answer, because the number of people that would honestly answer that would be 0, because not only are our users the weakest link, but I'm the weakest link, and you're the weakest link, and Grant and all of Tenio and everyone, we're all the weakest link, and we're distracted. So the point being that all it takes is one, as was pointed out, one email to get through, one click, one compromise, and it's an end game for the attackers. Now, what Checkpoint's strategy has been is actually quite simple. In terms of Office 365, let's go ahead and plug Office 365 in at the API level, not through some kind of mail transport or some kind of publicly exposed DNS MX record or something like that. Let's plug it in at the API level, and let's apply our market-leading threat prevention through Threat Cloud to it to stop not 70% or 80% or 90%, but 100%. Let's get them all stopped before they ever arrive in Grant's inbox in Office 365, because we know, as good-hearted as he is, he's going to have a moment of weakness and click on something, and we don't want him to be
expecting that UPS package.
Okay, and we expect that to happen.
I placed 4 orders with Amazon. I need
you
it.
expected the email to track your package, and you clicked on the fake link, and then you were compromised. Exactly. By the way, these are what Grant's referring to is a phenomenal short read. I highly recommend it. It's a blog entry about how the attackers, give me 1 minute, how the attackers in the holiday season are a life cycle attack, meaning we started in shopping. They were sending you phishing emails in the shopping phase. Now we're in the shipping phase, and they're sending malicious emails that are very convincing. 65% of these emails look like they're coming from Amazon, so people are clicking on them. But anyway, point being, as a service, and Office 365 are here to stay. We want to get that number from 70% catch to about 100%, because humans are the weakest link. And that's where CloudGuard SaaS comes in, and that's a solution that is exclusive from us. We're not knocking Microsoft. Believe me, they have better things to do than worry about security. They're busy building astronomical planet-wide infrastructure. So they're depending on good partners, and we're a good Microsoft partner. So that's the story about Cloud. Yeah,
in fact, I'm going to have...
that's a segue to you, Grant. Go ahead. That's a segue.
Yeah, I'm going to have Ed Waite, who's Director of Product Marketing for Azure Security, on my podcast, recording it on Friday. But hey, Brian, I would like... There may be some people in the audience that are Gilligans like me. I hear us talk about sandblast, 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 but we really never call it what it is and why it's so powerful and how we're able to actually promise near 100% effectiveness. Can you talk about what it really is doing? I mean, it's sandboxing the content so it doesn't get to me and testing it first, essentially, right? That's
part of it, but that's inconvenient, sandboxing. Let's be honest. Taking an attack. So what Grant's referring to is taking an attachment, throwing it in a detonation chamber, blowing it up against 60 AI and machine learning related engines, and that's great. So certainly that's something we ought to do. But most people don't have time to wait for that. So things like document whitening, the ability to strip off, any potentially malicious content. We extract that content, get that attachment to them. 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, the scrub document is perfectly fine. I'm living that every day here at Checkpoint, as many of you are. So yes, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that basically we've taken what we learned not only in the network and on the endpoint, but made it completely available to these as a service apps. And instantly, by way of API, we've applied things like threat extraction, the ability to detect a zero phishing attack. All right, quick raise of hands. Again, only the dog and the cat can see this, but a quick raise of hands, okay? And then I'm going to turn it over to you, Grant. Here's the quick raise of hands. How many people can discern visibly between what is a legitimate email and a phishing email? It's a loaded question, so nobody's raising their hand, I hope, okay? And furthermore, how many people believe that systems that are in place, across the planet generally have the intelligence to do just that? Well, the first line of defense is what we will call known attacks, things we've seen before. So a link that is in an email that it wants you to click, but someone knew that it was bad, so we recorded it as an indicator of compromise. And that's actually not the most interesting kind of attack. In fact, most attackers in their zeal and in their intellect and their running businesses might steer clear of these known attacks. Once a link becomes known, it's weak. Even a Microsoft, ATP could catch it. The more interesting ones are these zero phishing attacks, the ability to say, wait a minute, we don't know about that link, but the domain was registered 2 days ago. It's a low traffic domain. The domain was registered by someone who previously operated a known phishing domain. And let's look at 175 other things, and let's make a heuristic determination that, in fact, that is a 0-day phishing link. We had no knowledge of it. So, Grant, what people need to understand is that is what seals the deal. The ability to detect these zero, because that's where we're going. We're moving away from known attacks. So.
And I think also, Brian, I think I always am quick to point this out. You said this, first of all, earlier, one time, one person, one credential, and it just highlights the adage we've all heard, right? We have to be right every time. The bad guy has to be right once. The odds are so against us. So it really makes it very challenging for all of us, right? It's a tough game.
Now, let me say one more thing then to you, Grant, and that is that the guys over at the Teneo Group, probably more than most of our partners, if not all, know and understand the subtleties of this. So where we certainly bring a great solution. As was mentioned by Craig, these guys have seen this in the real world and understand what people are up against. So there's a good partnership there and a good opportunity to mix those synergies together to make sure that people aren't just looking at a product, they're looking at a real world problem that we can jointly solve with them.
Yeah, so Grant, before I let you jump in, we did have a question, and it's about a product that I despise because it never works right on my computer. The question is, how vulnerable do you think Teams and others are on mobile devices? Microsoft Teams, that is.
I'll take that. I'll take it.
Thank you.
And Brooks, thanks for asking the question. I was actually trying to type it, and then I realized my keyboard was probably. Can you hear this? Can you hear the keyboard? And I was trying to type an answer. But it's a very good question. The answer is, to my knowledge, there's no known exploit or vulnerability that's being exploited against Microsoft Teams on a mobile device. Does that make me feel any better? Absolutely not. You know why? Because it's irrelevant in a way. We look at, on the laptop, we look at a particular vulnerability in, let's say, the Zoom or the Teams platform, and we get very exercised about it. And of course, we're constantly loading up new versions, and we should be doing that on the mobile device anyway. But the honest to God truth is, for me to compromise the corporate network, I don't need Teams. I have plenty of other ways I could do it. Most of them involving consumer level applications. Think about it. If I were going to target a BYOD device, and I were applying all of my investment to break open a BYOD device, I wouldn't be starting with Teams. I'd be starting with Facebook, Instagram, and all the consumer level apps that I guarantee you no company is looking at. No corporate IT department is saying, wait a minute, let's make sure that we're using the latest version of Teams before. No, I would. So that is the broader problem. The targets are the consumer level apps, not the corporate apps. So to answer the question directly, I don't know of anything in Teams that would be vulnerable to attack on a mobile device, but just because it's not my prime area, I wouldn't be focusing on that. I would be looking at the Instagrams and the things you probably especially don't care about, probably as a corporate IT guy.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell a quick story before we dive into Grant here. That in a former life that I had less than 3 or 4 years ago, one of my customers was a big hotel chain, which is twice the size now as it was then. And they, I had good friends in their cybersecurity SOC environment. And starting about a week before Thanksgiving, and this ties into what Brian was describing about phishing and targeted phishing attacks, starting just before Thanksgiving, and it would go all the way into a week and a half after New Year's, their phishing attacks would go up tenfold. And then right before New Year's and right after New Year's, the phishing attacks would go up tenfold again. And the reason being is the goals for these guys, the hackers, were to overload people's inboxes. Because what do you do as a human when you come in after vacation and your inbox has 1,000 mails in it? What do you do with them? Either you delete them or you click, 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 click. So all it takes is one to go one step too far, and they've got you. So they, just another tale from, a story that we.
So they're trying to increase their odds. That's it. They're just increasing their odds of success there. That's a good strategy for them.
Yeah. So far we've talked about end users, And everybody knows the end users are the weakest link. And just look at any story that's out there in the last little bit. Everybody's talking about the end users, the weakest link. Endpoint devices that are outside your environment, mobile devices, we now recognize that we should probably be paying attention a little bit more. Those devices are just allowing the end users to communicate to an application. Most applications are now running in software as a service environments. But the crown jewels, the pieces that the customer, that the hackers really want to get to, that are trying to figure out, is that data. That data used to be stored either on your laptop or used to be stored on, depending on which way you're doing mail, if you're doing POP or IMAP, depending, where it was stored. That data is now stored in that software as a service location or in a cloud environment, either a private or public cloud environment. And what we're recognizing and seeing is, and everybody understands that cloud is here to stay. Everybody's moving. If we think that, we're going to go back to normal after this COVID stuff is over, I mean, most organizations were trying to figure out how to shut down their data centers because it was costing too much money now. Now they're recognizing I could shut down my entire brick and mortar environment and save even more money. So this is great news, but that means anything that's in that environment needs to get out, right, and go somewhere. So now your crown jewels are on somebody else's network and somebody else's design and somebody else upgrading it. So is there a way of looking and monitoring into somebody else's network, even though it is a quote unquote public cloud, Azure, AWS, Google, GCP, Oracle? Is there a way to look into this stuff and really understand that network as well as you understand your own network? Grant, that one's targeted towards you.
Yeah, so, I first want to just comment on a couple of things. You mentioned this earlier, Brian, and I think you're exactly spot on. This whole circumstance the globe has found ourselves in has done nothing more than accelerate the transformation. And Craig, I think you're spot on. I had the dubious honor to be on a panel that was put on by IDC with a couple hundred CISOs. And this was up in Tremblant. And he started it off, it was a cloud summit, and he started it off by saying, everyone is going to be moving to the cloud. Everyone. It's just going to take 40 or 50 years. And that really makes a key point that people need to understand about what's going on in the cloud. Because remember, we've been talking about SaaS, right? Remember, Brian, I think it was probably maybe 10 years ago, you'd ask somebody, hey, are you using SaaS? And they go, oh yeah, we use Salesforce. Because that was SaaS. I mean, what else was there, right? The cloud was Salesforce, tribute to Benioff. I mean, you got to give it to him. Now, that silly putty has stretched, and look how big that word is today. It's enormous, from SaaS all the way through to I have complete PaaS infrastructure, serverless, and the list goes on and on and on. This is what's making it so challenging because, and this sums up this, I mean, to me, I thought this was the perfect clash of what we have going on that represents the risk that we're all up against. It's speed. Okay? I mean, and what does the cloud give us? Speed. Unprecedented speed and agility and the ability to just do stuff like never before. But with that speed comes really high risk unless you've got something to keep you on the rails. Think out in the salt flats, right? If I sit down in one of those rockets on wheels, I don't really got to worry about, I mean, I'm wide open. Take that same rocket on wheels out onto I-5 or the 101, you got a little bit of a different concern. And so this is what I think people have to understand is as this silly putty has stretched, and it's happened fast, right? Now, oh, by the way, Brian, Craig, you're still dragging along this long, huge chain of all your on-prem stuff, all the stuff that you haven't got migrated yet, that you hope to migrate, haven't given me the version yet that I can migrate. This just makes it harder because the hors d'oeuvre trays can only hold so much. New shit's coming, new stuff's coming so fast, and you just can't keep up. And so that's when you make mistakes. You say, hey, Brian, you've been using that F5 load balancer, haven't you? Hey, well, then will you configure that ELB? Brian says, oh, what is it? It's a load balancer. Sure. And we run off thinking, no problem. It's the subtleties and the nuances. How many in the audience right now remembers RTFM? Anybody? Yeah, baby. The F, of course, is fine unless you ask me 17 times in the morning and I'm about to shoot you. But nobody does that anymore. What do? We hunt and click, point and click, hunt and click. Oh, undo. Do you know that in AWS alone, there's some 200 controls that have no undo? None. Delete database. Okay. Oh, no. And so these little nuances are forcing all of us. And oh, by the way, before I could pull up my sleeves and get my hand right on that baby.
He's rolling his sleeves up. Look out.
Right
out.
on the keyboard, man.
Somewhere. I don't know where he's going now.
Where's he going with this? Where's he going with this?
It's all marionette. It's all marionette. It's APIs. I'm holding up more strings, more fine-grained control over that, but I don't have my hands on it anymore. It's up somewhere else. And where this is going is the need for new tools to control this environment, because we can't rely on the old tools. How many of you remember when virtualization came about, right? We were just hating the fact we had appliances running at 15%, and all of a sudden, thank you, Stanford, VMware, wow, check this out. But all of a sudden, Craig's going, what the hell is this vMotion stuff? What's this? Hey, who's watching the communications between these VMs inside the server? Nobody. And all of a sudden, we had these new tools we needed, nothing that we could throw away, but we needed new tools to be able to really wrestle this exciting new environment. Well, if you thought sprawl and drift was a problem then, ladies and gentlemen, deja vu, it's like the late great Yogi Berra, man. It's deja vu all over again, because now I don't have to get into your data center. I have to show my card key. I can be anywhere on the planet with the right credentials. So the world is drastically changing, and it's calling for new tools. And it's why, all of the stuff I'm kind of babbling on about leads to the statistic I suspect almost all of you have heard. At least 99% of all public cloud failures will be the customer's fault. Now, I don't know where you guys grew up, but where I grew up, if somebody said, hey, it's going to be at least, and then follows with a number, I kind of immediately go above it, right? It's going to be at least 20%. Well, shoot, it might be 25. Well, how much farther can you go if it's at least 99%? I mean, it's their ways. It's going to be your fault. And it's why in their document, we pay the Gartner tax, like I'm sure many of you guys do, right? And so we get access to these really great documents and research. And one that was put out last October, end of October, the headline was how to make your cloud data center more secure than your on-premise data center. And a lot of people find that quite surprising, because statistically, somewhere like 78% of us are either very or extremely concerned about cloud security. So there's this huge dichotomy in terms of the truth and what people believe. And that, I think, is rooted in the gross misunderstanding of the shared responsibility model, what it really means, and the reason we're so confused. Brian, have you been to Starbucks lately? They have, I kid you not, man, Have
Don't
you seen
kid
it
me.
on the menu?
No.
A cloud macchiato. How
I don't
crazy
know. I
is
have
that?
not seen this.
They have a cloud macchiato. I'm not joking. Okay. And there's a local
Is it
mattress
automated?
store.
Does it get built in an automated way, or
No.
trying to be
Cloud
relevant?
macchiato. It's nice fun. It's got some egg or something in it. But the point is, the vernacular has seeped into our daily lives so much because it's the right thing. I mean, there's a mattress store locally, Craig, that says, "Hey, come on in and get your own private cloud." Right? I mean, and so this just heats on the confusion of what is cloud, SaaS, PaaS, and so on. So the point I guess I'm getting to really when we talk about you want to use it, I think everybody should. We should be looking at using it cloud native, but you have to be aware that if you've never bowled before, you'd be really well served to get those bumpers put down the lanes before you throw the ball. Okay. And that's exactly what posture management can provide for customers, is give them that protection. Now there's a varied and broad landscape of posture management tools out there. So be forewarned. You need to dig in a little bit, because some say, hey, we do continuous compliance, for example, but compliance is like accounting. We all do it a little bit differently, right? And so having the ability to customize for just me within that posture management tool, all of those compliance rules I need because I have to adhere to my local compliance regulations. Those are the kinds of things you really want to dig into, because those nuances can be very costly if you got to call up dev every time you want to make a change.
So you mentioned posture management, and I know you just went through a bunch of stuff about it and why it's important, but what is in posture management? And if you had to give me that 15-second elevator conversation about what posture management is.
It's really pretty straightforward. Okay. It's understanding and appreciating that it's not my data center here. I got to get to it somewhere else. So we've got a new way of accessing it. There's a control plane to get to my environment. And I need to, because visually right now, just imagine a swimming hole. Now I'll paint two pictures for you. One, above ground swimming pool in your backyard. That's a swimming hole. You got to worry about it. You got to worry about the chlorine. You got to put more water in if there's not enough. Or up in the woods, there's this waterfall that feeds into this nice big pool. Also a swimming hole. But the difference is it's always changing, and you really don't give a hoot about pH and chlorine. You care if something's out there going to eat you and bite you. So my point is they're both swimming holes, but there's big differences. But in the posture management, to get to your question, I need the tools to ensure I minimize my tolerances, my variances. I control, for example, you ever heard of an S3 or storage bucket vulnerability or compromise? If you haven't, just do a search, because they happen all the time. Far and away the most popular, most common, right? You can have a posture management tool with a rule that says, I don't want any S3 buckets exposed to the internet unencrypted. And then that tool will be able to discover and find any that don't meet your requirement. For example, visibility. You can't control what you can't see. And I mentioned already, drift, sprawl, holy moly. So posture management tools are going to go in without any agents. Okay. You just got to plug them into your account, let them go. And then they go and they find all your stuff, and you'll be amazed every time it gets done. You've seen it, right, Brian? You run the POC and you go to lunch and you come back, and the first comment is, "What the hell's that? Hey, what's this? I didn't know I had that account." right? So first and foremost, you got to be able to see it all, visualize it, see all your assets, know what you have, and then understand the security posture of the security groups, for example, within those VPCs, within those environments, and easily and quickly discover when you don't have something properly configured and maybe port 22 is left open on a particular resource that you don't want to.
So quick question. There is one more question in our list, but I have a question is from the perspective of the cloud, and this is for everybody. I always thought that we would end up seeing a company choose a cloud, choose one of them, put all their eggs in that one basket. But as I've been talking to my customers and talking about security, I'm starting to see they're using all the different clouds for all the different reasons that they're good. For example, they'll use Azure for their Active Directory. They'll use AWS for their S3 buckets. They'll use or Oracle Cloud because their database runs better in Oracle, and they just converted that from Azure over to Oracle. Are you seeing a bunch of cross cloud setups within the customers that you've been talking to and stuff? And is that normal?
This far and away, the norm is multi-cloud, hybrid. I mean, most enterprises have something on-prem, so they want to straddle that with the cloud. And most of them, just from good governance and from a GRC perspective, we're seeing many of them actually stand up one environment and point to another vendor's cloud environment as the DR, as a backup, right? So there's a lot of it. Furthermore, you mentioned something that I just think is really important for people to understand. All of the, first of all, the herd is getting thinner, okay? And the horses that are running in the race are getting bigger, far and away. Very, very similar to, some other industries. Think television, right? I mean, it's changed a bit, but in the early days, ultimately there was these big ones. Same in telco. So you're seeing these monsters emerge. Okay, now they're all summiting the same mountain, but they have different sacred cows. And I'll give you my example. There's something that one of them has that's called Active Directory. You may have heard of it, but some others don't. And that might play an influence on how they implement identity and access management that others could give a hoot about. Same mountain, different ways. I'll give you another great example. There was a cloud vendor that swore they'd never be anything but cloud. And then customers said, I'm going to go with this guy because he's got something that's on-prem and cloud, and voila, Outpost was born. So, the market is very fluid right now. It's changing, and it's highly responsive to what customers are asking. And far and away, more customers are using multiple clouds, multiple cloud vendors, doing exactly what you're saying, Craig, building these applications that used to sit monolithic in a database, or in a data center. I mean, think about that for a second. Now an application is a composition of a whole bunch of microservices. It's not like in one place, here's my app. It's an S3 bucket that's using RD, this database. And then tomorrow I decide to change to Mongo because it's a better database and everything else. I mean, those are new controls that we haven't even thought about putting in place to make sure that that's even okay to do.
So you just described a really grand picture of, is it easy to develop a view or being able to develop rules to be able to see the compliance within a multi-cloud environment? Is that something that's hard or easy? Because you just described a really complex environment. Can we make it simple and things like that? And then before you follow up, it's 429. We have our Shane Merriman, who is part of the Bourbon, part of the Garrison distillery, on. I'm not stopping this, but if people had any questions, I wanted you all to go ahead and start asking some of the questions. and then we can go from there. But, Grant, is there something that you can show to show how
Yeah.
easy it is?
So let me go, let me get out of this. And no, I don't want to leave. Let me share my screen, and I'll just, this, one of the things that I brought up earlier was, cloud is such a big word. I mean, and it's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger and spanning more and more as we go from, moving a VM and a lift and shift kind of mentality, or using some SaaS app to, full on functions, serverless, Lambda, Kubernetes, and the list goes on. And so the challenge is, how do I harmonize? How do I unify the view of all of that stuff? And that's what we've been doing as CloudGuard has essentially evolved in the last 2 years as part of Checkpoint's overall Infinity architecture, and it's essentially it's our cloud platform on which we're building out all of the rest of the capabilities. And you can see along the left-hand pane, it's deep, from your asset and posture management, your security, IAM. I mean, I don't have to read this. Logic, which is just a super cool threat hunting. We've tied all of this into our threat intelligence. And so it's really, really cool. But for the sake of time, I'm going to just show one thing that I think it's such a big differentiator for us, but so critical, and that is something we call GSL, Governance Specific Language. And I think maybe we even have recently changed that acronym, so my apologies if I didn't get it right. I think they wanted that S to be security. But you'll see we have something here called the Gsl Builder. Now, first, we of course have just tons and tons of rule sets that are already built. HIPAA, NIST, ISO, I mean, tons of them that are already, and these are not ours that we made up. We're implementing as per the cloud provider. So we're very stringent on that. But when we go to the Gsl Builder, and I'm going to make this quick and stupid simple, but hey, I'm a Gilligan, and this is what makes this so powerful. I want to make a rule. I just was told by my boss, Brian, that, I need to make sure that all of my S3 buckets are encrypted. Watch this. I'm going to write a rule, and I could go to the free text if I was as smart as Craig and Brian, but I'm not. So I'm going to go to the builder, and I could limit myself by checking on one of these, but I'll leave the entire inventory. And I'm going to say, I want a rule, and that rule is going to be S3 bucket should have encryption. Close the scope. Now I can go and choose where I want to run this, right? What environment? I'm going to actually go into my AWS production environment. I could choose a particular VPC or region, but I'm going to just go ahead and I'm going to test. And now it's going to come back and say, hey, wow, you have all 76 of them. Okay, but Brian, who's Craig's boss, just called and said, hey, we're going to start doing some business with Microsoft and with Google. And so we need to add a tag or an ID to every Amazon S3 bucket that has to be equal to AWS. Add it. Now let's test. I know you know the answer, but what's the point? The point is, in this highly fluid world that's changing every day, you need this flexibility to be able to say, hey, we need to turn on a dime and then have that go and interrogate your environment. Furthermore, I mentioned this earlier, we don't touch your junk, right? So we say, oh, you've got 76 buckets that don't have an ID. I still have to go add that. That's where you want to check out CloudBots. And I'm going to really leave it to Craig, you and the Tenio group to tell them about how to implement that open source remediation capability to truly automate that so that you'll never have to go hunt it down on your own again. But with that, I'm going to stop sharing and thank you very much.
Well, I appreciate both of your all's time on this. And my follow-up for anybody that's on the call is if any of this has piqued your interest, from mobile security to endpoint to cloud security to SaaS security, just let us know, and we will be reaching out to every one of you to find out if there's interest. One of the last questions was, we recently started using Carbonite. What kind of projection do you suggest? And if I recall correctly, Carbonite's more or less a backup utility. And so it's backing up your information. Does it do more than that? And then, if that's what you're looking for to do backup, there are systems that can do that. But, if you're counting on a backup to save you, that's fine. One of our partners is a company called Unitrends, and Unitrends has a statement saying ransomware isn't a security problem. It's a backup problem, right? Because anybody's going to get hacked. The question is, can you recover from it, right? That's their story, but you know what they are? They're a backup company. So what we look at from the perspective of security and protection is prevention. The goal is to prevent on your network, on your endpoint, on your mobile, in the cloud, on your software as a service, Office 365 mail. It's to prevent. The goal is not to let it happen to start with. And that's what some of the story we're having here.
It's folly, Craig. It's folly to think that, I got a backup, so I don't care about malware or ransomware, because here's what's going to happen. It's going to go something like this. Hey, Brian, yeah, I got your email. I see you've encrypted all my stuff, but hey, that's okay. I'm backed up. And Brian says, oh, okay. Well, then you're not going to mind if I go ahead and just post this out on every public website and let the world see all of your data. Have a nice day. So, it evolves from ransomware to extortionware. And you're not going to win unless you just prevent it altogether.
Yeah. So does anybody have any questions above and beyond that? Brian, do you want to fill us in any more? I mean, one of the things we didn't talk about is, and I sort of alluded before we turned the event over to Shane and actually the enjoyable liquor part. I sort of mentioned a little bit about tons of different solutions that are out there. I look at it from like Office 365. You can have Mimecast or Microsoft MTP, and then there's SaaS, CASB protections. In the cloud, you have all the cloud services and providers that are out there protecting things. On your network, you have all your firewalls and threat preventions, and then you have IPS and you have sandboxing, and I mean, it just goes on and on. Does it make sense to try to consolidate where you can?
Absolutely.
Great,
Absolutely.
but
Yes.
if you have 100 products and consolidate down to 10, does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. And the reason it makes perfect sense primarily for two reasons. One, it unifies the management experience for, teams that are already overworked. You look at an architecture like Checkpoint's Infinity architecture, which consolidates the management of security for things like endpoint, IoT, cloud, data center, mobile, the network, which everybody knows about. But it unifies it into a single portal that makes it all very, very easy and reduces the cost, and the cost of ownership, reduces the number of people it takes to run this stuff, provides the level of security that's needed. There's very little downside to looking at a unified architecture to drive cost and drive time out of the organization. Now, on a normal day, not in Corona time, but on a normal day, that's very compelling. In Corona, when everyone is stretched twice as thin, and there's less time, less people, less hiring. The market for hiring good security talent has been reduced. People are in demand. Nobody's moving. A lot of people are staying put. So all these point to a need to have not only a consolidated security architecture, one that's managed centrally and that things are shared, entities are shared between the cloud and the network and the endpoint and the intelligence we learn about an indicator of compromise in the cloud, and then everyone that's leveraging endpoint immediately realizes the security of that without reinventing wheels. So yes, it's a very good time to be looking at collapsing down complex, siloed, multi-product organizations. But I do have to say, Craig, that we need a good partner to help our customers do that. Teneo is one that can definitely do that. We certainly, as the vendor of and the unifier of the architecture, I think we excel. But we need you guys to work with our customers to make this a reality for them. And you have the kind of experience out there in the industry to make that happen. So please do.
Awesome. And I know I said at the very beginning that we had a couple panelists that could probably talk the entire time. And so the big question I have is, does anybody have any questions as we're in this, or is everybody thinking about those little test tubes that you have with the caps and what else you can use for them after the bourbon's gone? If anybody has had any question, please either put it in the chat or give us a holler. If no, and even during this period when Shane's going to jump on and start talking, if you have a question, put it in the chat, and then we can circle back with you on that.
Hey, if I can just say on behalf of myself, and I suspect Brian's going to nod along, I want to thank you. This has been a lot of fun, and I enjoy having the chance to have the conversation, and we love working with you guys, Craig. You are a great partner, and I think what you can do is you can help minimize the risk while still enabling the speed. And that's a powerful combination to be able to provide. So thank you.
Well, thank you guys very much. So I'm going to turn this over to Shane Merriman. Shane, how do you say your last name?
Like the dictionary, Merriam.
Merriam. Shane is from the Gsl Brothers Distillery, and he's here to talk about the packages that you guys got. Again, like I said, the chat is still open, and we are, if you guys have some questions that you want to ask about anything, great. If not, we will be circling back with each and every one of you to catch back up to make sure that if there's something that you wanted to know. So Shane, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk from this point on.
Appreciate that, Craig. Well, hello, everybody. My name's Shane Merriam. I am the bourbon provocateur for the Gsl Brothers Distillery, and we are the very first legal bourbon coming out of the state of Texas. Yes, you can make bourbon in Texas. We'll get into that in a little bit. Hopefully you all received your package, and you'll have 3 tubes left. I have a feeling some of you probably got into it already, and if you did, that's not a problem. I'm sure Grant did, because that dude is like the Energizer Bunny. Hopefully I can keep up with that. And Brian, I appreciate the fact that you're looks like you're sitting in a bar right now. You're making me feel a lot comfortable, so appreciate that. On your 3 vials that you got 3 of our bourbons. The one that has no markings on the top, that will be our small batch bourbon. The one that has a number on there, that is the number of the single barrel bourbon. And the one that has the H on there, that's our honeydew bourbon. So you've got 3 different bourbons in there, and we're going to touch on all of them. And you do not need my permission to start drinking, but I will turn it into a little bit of a game. Whenever you hear me say the word terroir, you need to take a sip. So we'll get right on there. Gsl Brothers. Dan Garrison's our founder. Back in the 90s, he was doing, a little bit of work out there in Texas, and he saw all these people in the .com boom making all kinds of money, and he thought, well, I'm a pretty clever guy. I need to get myself a piece of the pie. So he went out and he found some kids, and they wrote some software. And overnight, his company was worth millions of ones and zeros out there on the stock market. But as you guys know, you can't always cash out right away. So he did what every Texan does. He went out, he bought a big truck with big tires, and he told everybody he was going to be retired by the age of 40 and ride off into the sunset. Well, fast forward a little bit, a little thing called Enron happened in Houston, and his company that sold software went from hero to zero overnight. To make matters worse, a few months later, the IRS came knocking on his door and said, by the way, you owe us $160,000 in taxes for those commodities that you never cashed out on. Now, he didn't know what to do. He had no money. His stocks were worth absolutely nothing. He owed all this. So he went to his friends. He went to his family. He begged. He pleaded. He borrowed as much as he could, and he came up with $60,000. Now, in Texas, when you owe somebody some money, they don't take your car and your house. They take your wife and your dog. So Dan was pretty fond of his dog, so he didn't want to, forfeit on this. So he went to the IRS with that $60,000 check and said, we can do one of two things here, fellas. You can either take this check and we're going to call it a day and free and clear, or I'm going to take this $60,000, go to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail and get shit-faced until every single nickel's gone. So the IRS said, well, let's not be too hasty. Let's just take that check and call it a day. And being a very responsible husband and father, he went to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail anyway. This is where he got to meet the legends of the game. The late, great Dave Pickerel, who was at Maker's Mark at the time. Jimmy and Eddie Russell over at Wild Turkey. Late, great Elmer T. Lee over at Buffalo Trace. And they were all sitting in the bar, and he looked at them and said, why do all your tour guides keep saying that you can only make bourbon in Kentucky? We all know that's a bunch of horse shit. Well, Elmer looked at him and said, well, nobody's ever tried to do it outside of Kentucky. So a big light bulb went off in Dan's head, and he set off to make the best bourbon that he knew how to make. I mean, his wife always told him that he drank so much of it, he may as well make it. So that's pretty much where we got started out there in Texas back in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I'll quickly run down the ABCs of bourbon, and then I'll get into the marks that you guys have there in front of you. If you have any questions on where to get it and where to find it, I know that many of you are in different cities or different states. Feel free to email me there. You got my card in your little boxes, Shane@GarrisonBros.com. And if we are distributed in your state, you can go right ahead to any one of your local liquor stores and they can bring it in. It's not a special order or something like that. But I do remember as I sent out those kits, there might be one or two states that we're not distributed in yet so far. So let's just start with the letter A. America. In order to be legally called a bourbon, you have to be made in America. In 1964, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed a declaration stating that bourbon is America's national spirit. With the exception of a tiny little distillery out there in Virginia, we were just the first ones to start doing it in Texas. That's really that simple. B, that goes into our barrels. In order to be legally called bourbon, you have to use a brand new charred oak container. We happen to use American white oak barrels, and we can only use those barrels one time. We fill up those barrels with our distillate, with our spirit, with our white dog, with our white lightning, call it whatever you want. And then after 4 years, we dump them all. We put them into our bottles. We send them out. We hope the world enjoys it. But we can only use that barrel one time. If we were to refill that barrel and use it again, we could call it whiskey, but we can't call it bourbon. So what most bourbon distilleries around America do is they resell those used barrels. We send them over to Scotland and Ireland for them to finish their whiskey. We send them over to Japan, India. We send them down in Mexico. That's what they put their reposados and their añejo tequilas in. We send them over to Avery Island in Louisiana. That's what they put Tabasco sauce in. We work with wineries, with breweries, with cideries. There's all kinds of secondary things. Usually a barrel has a 200 to 300 year lifespan, depending on how well you take care of it. But when you're making bourbon, you can only use that one single time. That leads us to C, corn. In order to be legally called bourbon, in your ingredient mash bill, that's the combination of the different grains that you're using to make that liquor, you have to be at least 51% corn. Now, at Garrison Brothers, we do a couple things a little bit different. Number one, we're a wheated bourbon, so there's zero rye in any of our bourbon. And every bourbon that we do is the exact same mash bill. We are a bourbon distillery. That's all we make, with the tiny exception of hand sanitizer right now. All we make is bourbon. We don't make any gin, vodkas, whiskeys, anything like that. That's it. That's all. And we're using all Texas grain. So we're doing 74% white panhandle corn, 15% soft red winter wheat, and 11% malted barley. So our mash bill is a little bit similar to some other bourbons you may have heard of before. Pappy Van Winkle, Weller, Blanton's, Maker's Mark. It's a very kind of, I don't want to say rare category, but it's one of the smaller categories of wheated bourbon, whereas the majority of bourbon distilleries, they do use some rye in there. So different flavor, and I think that's why you guys will get a lot of that sweetness. At least I hope that's what you're tasting on the front end of those bourbons. And then that'll bring us to D, distillation. The hand sanitizer, Craig, is the most expensive hand sanitizer on the planet because we're using the exact same mash bill, all food-grade grain going into our sanitizer. I know we've probably been out there and gone to the grocery store or something, and it smells like, a cross between some pretty rancid tequila and a men's locker room. Some of these sanitizers are just absolutely gross. Ours really does. It's the most expensive stuff out there. I don't know why we didn't choose to make it a little bit less and use some sugar or really any starch you can convert into that for fermentation. But it is what it is. It does smell. Well, it doesn't smell like bourbon. It smells like the White Dog because we're obviously not finishing our hand sanitizer in wood and barrels. We're pretty crazy, but we're not batshit crazy. So just a little bit there. So D, distillation. So after we're fermenting, which is basically making a beer, you can't make a whiskey without making a beer first. So we take all those grains, we put them into a big old kettle, just talking rudimentaries here, and we start to boil it up kind of like we're making an oatmeal. This really kind of extracts the starches out of those grains, and then the enzymes in the barley convert that starch into sugar. Now we add the yeast. The yeast starts eating all of those sugars, creating CO2 and creating alcohol. We've got a 14% ABV sweet mash before we've even put it into the stills to start making our White Dog. So we transfer it over to the stills, and when we distill, we're doing it at about 135, 137. In order to be legally bourbon, you have to do it under 160 proof. If you're doing anything over 160 proof, you're doing vodka, you're doing gin, you're doing neutral grain spirit. There's nothing wrong with that. But with bourbon, you got to keep it under 160. So really think of bourbon like when you're doing barbecue. You want to do it low and slow, and you want to extract as much of those flavors as you possibly can. That leads us to E, entry proof. When we take that White Dog, that White Lightning, that Moonshine, that Spirit, that distillate, whatever you want to call it, off the stills at 135, 137, we now enter into that brand new charred oak barrel, and it has to be under 125 proof to be still legally called bourbon. So how do we get it from 137 down to 125 proof? What we do is we add some Texas rainwater that we collect off our rick house rooftops, and we add that water in there. By adding that natural water, you're really getting that kind of big mouthfeel, that unctuousness, that oiliness, a lot of flavor. I can't see a lot of you, you're not on video, but if you haven't had a sip in maybe 60 seconds, I know you can still taste it out there. It's still there. It's a long-lasting, lingering 94 proof big bold bourbon. So we fill those barrels, our entry proof, we do it at 124, we roll them into our rick house, and we leave it set there for 4 years. After 4 years, this is where the fun starts. We go out there and we get to go taste every single one of those barrels. Now, the very first sample you have, the small batch that has no markings on the top, that's our small batch. So that's a combination of 50 to 60 barrels of bourbon at a time for consistency. So no matter where you are, if you're in Fort Lauderdale, if you're in Seattle, if you're in Boston, Massachusetts, and you get a bottle of small batch bourbon, it's going to taste the exact same for consistency. Now, if you move over to that other one that's got the 4-digit number, that 4-digit number is the number of the actual single barrel that was in. So every single barrel will be slightly different. So that all the bourbon in there came from one individual barrel, and it will be different than the one next to it. Sometimes it might have a note from maybe it's some marzipan, maybe it's some butterscotch, maybe it's some salted caramel. I had one at a tasting out in Los Angeles. It had some candied red apple like you'd get at the state fair. It stopped me dead in my tracks. I had never tasted red apple in our bourbon before. So that one was a lot of fun. So that'll come in a silver bottle. Unfortunately, I'm on the road right now. I'm in Tyler, Texas right now, which is way up in the kind of northeast part of Texas, driving from Nashville back to the distillery on Friday. And if you guys are ever in this neighborhood, I'm in a beautiful place called The Grove. This venue is absolutely phenomenal. They've been plying me with bourbon all afternoon. It's quite the place out there. But after 4 years, we then go empty those barrels. Where am I at there? I did A, I did B, I did C, I did D, I did E, F. So after we take out those barrels, when we fill them up with 124 proof White Dog, they can come out of the barrel anywhere between 114 proof all the way up to, I've seen some that are 148.9 proof. You're getting the majority of your flavor, and 100% of the color in that bourbon is coming from the barrel. So what we do now is we then proof it down by adding some more of that Texas rainwater that we did when we proofed it down to enter the barrel. We then proof it down to 94. So both of those two bourbons that you have there, the small batch and the single barrel, are the identical mash bill, the identical distillation, identical proof. Everything's the same. The only difference is one is a combination of a whole lot of barrels for consistency, and the other one is one single barrel. So hopefully if you didn't drink them all or you have a bit left, you could try it side by side and see just how different that is. And that's Texas. That's terroir. That's nothing that we do to manipulate the bourbon. That's when it's just sitting out there taking care of business. So your barrel pretty much acts like your sponge. So when you fill that barrel and it gets hotter, that little vapor pocket that's in that airtight barrel will expand, forcing your distillate into that wood. As it gets cooler, it gets smaller going in and out. So that liquid going in and out of the wood, getting all those beautiful flavors, those vanillas, those caramels, whatever else that barrel magically wants to give you, and it gets all the color from there. And that leads me into the final letter of the alphabet. I promise I'm not going to go all the way down. G, genuine. Bourbon is the most regulated spirit on the planet. It's more regulated than tequila, than cognac, than Armagnac. I don't think vodka even has regulations. We are not allowed to add anything into that bourbon with the exception of water. Our friends out there in Scotland and Ireland making whiskey, they can take it out of the barrel. They can add all the caramel coloring they want into those bottles and still call it Scotch or Irish whiskey. Our friends up north in Canada, they can add all the flavoring and coloring they want into that and still call it Canadian whiskey. We are not allowed to add anything in there. If any bartender tries to give you a peanut butter bourbon, you have my permission to punch them square in the face. You cannot add anything into that. It will then be called whiskey. So we're super proud of the heritage that we have coming out of there, and with all the help we have out there in Kentucky. We're not making we're not reinventing fermentation or distillation, the science of it. It really is just the terroir. What makes it different? Our climate is so different. We get so much hotter during the daytime, so much cooler there at night. Our water source, we're on a beautiful limestone aquifer out there in Texas. The reason you see all these distilleries where they are in Kentucky, if you go down the history, it really is a lot for the water source because they need that super hard water with all those vitamins and minerals that make that great big bourbon flavor in there when it feeds off all the nutrients in the yeast. I mean, I'm going to get into the kind of science and geeky stuff like that. I'll feel free to, fill that in on an email or something like that because it even just kind of bores myself hearing about it sometimes. But again, that's why most of the horses out there in Kentucky constantly win because those horses are drinking all that hard water full of the vitamins and minerals, getting big, strong bones and everything like that. So the water really is a big reason of where they do it. And then right now it is really an exciting time for bourbon in America because you're seeing bourbon distilleries pop up in pretty much every single state. There's bourbons coming out of Alaska, coming out of Hawaii, coming out of Las Vegas, up in Maine, up in Vermont. And to see how different the terroir is from Kentucky to Tennessee to Colorado to where we are in Texas, it really does make a difference. It was really Elmer T. Lee's dream over at Buffalo Trace. He made the greats like Blanton's and Weller and, Pappy Van Winkle, all these other bourbons you may have heard of. But he had always wondered why the U.S. was generations and generations behind Scotland when it came to whiskey distilling. Scotland being such a tiny little country with so many different flavor profiles coming from their whiskey. And it's because they have so many different climates and water sources and grain sources, whereas everything we had in America was coming from one spot, Kentucky. So for the most part, it was the same. So now when you're tasting something coming from Vermont next to something coming from Portland, Oregon, next to something coming from us in Texas, we're really, really getting there. So I can really see, 50 years to 80 years down the road, I'm really excited for seeing what bourbon's going to happen down the road. I see some questions here. The corn is an organic farmer. We're doing all that. We went out when we first started. We were using the same yellow corn that they were using out there in Kentucky and Tennessee. One day, it was probably a Friday, and the guy was probably pretty drunk. He came and dropped off a big old truckload of white panhandle corn. Now, these corn kernels are about 4 times the size of yellow corn, and about 4 times the price as well. And we kind of said, well, hold on here. We can't even pay the cable bill. There's no way we could afford this corn. So the driver said, well, why don't I just leave it here? You can have it for free. And next week I'll take it back. And so we mashed it in, and we loved the sugar content that we were getting out. We loved the flavor we were getting out there. Donis Todd, our master distiller, he went up and personally met the corn farmer. His dog's name is Whiskey. Like, we're not going to work with a guy like that. And we just started saying, why are we paying these corn farmers in other states? Why don't we take care of our neighbors? So that's the whole reason we did start doing it a little bit differently with Texas white panhandle corn, which is a lot more expensive, but we believe the taste is a lot worth it. And again, we're taking care of our neighbors. I mean, I don't know exactly the stats, but I would have to think the only person using more white corn than us in Texas might be a tortilla factory. I mean, that's the only thing I could think of off the top of my head. Can you get a hat? I'll tell you what, Brooks, you can come out and visit us at the distillery anytime. We're just in High, Texas, HYE. We're just about an hour west of Austin. If you took a dart, threw it at the map of Texas, hit a bullseye, that's going to be us right out there. If you go on the Google there and look up our bottles, you'll see our bottles are all different colors depending on the small batch, the single barrel, the honeydew, which I'll get into in a little minute. And every single one of our bottles is all hand dipped in wax by volunteers. We've had 3-star generals, country music stars. We had an astronaut come out, for crying out loud, and give us some of his time. And we repay you in kind by giving you breakfast, by giving you lunch, and pretty much giving you a shot of bourbon every 30 minutes. So it is a ton of fun. It turns into quite a party. You can go right to our website, GarisonBros.com, and sign up to volunteer. And we give you about an 8-week notice when your number's selected, and you can just come out and enjoy it out in the hill country. We've got some hammocks out there. I'll tell you what, I've had more than one nap after my 7th or 8th shot and some lunch out in those hammocks. It really is a good time out there in hill country. Who do I got there? Bourbon just makes life better. I mean, it is true. Everybody at Garrison Brothers, we believe good bourbon's going to change the world. We believe that good bourbon creates more solid friendships, and even better, we believe that good bourbon creates legendary stories. I don't know exactly how PG this is. I didn't get the heads up from John, but feel free to follow me on Instagram or hit me up somehow, and I can tell you a few stories that aren't quite PG. And the strangest place I ever woke up was Buffalo. So there's a lot of fun things going on there.
Where did you start, though?
Let's one more thing. I forgot to talk about the honeydew. So that's a brand new bourbon. So going back to what I said there about the peanut butter bourbon, like I said, by law, you are not allowed adding anything into the bourbon. Once you add anything other than water, it's whiskey. So a few years back, Nancy Garrison, Dan's wife, approached him and said, I want you to make me a flavored bourbon. So he smiled real big. He knew he was off the hook, and he said, well, sweetheart, by law, I'm not allowed to do that. She just looked at him dead in the eye and said, figure it out, and left the room. So he hoed and he hummed, and he's like, what am I going to do about this? And then they came up with the idea. One thing that you can do with bourbon is you are allowed to finish it in a different wood. So if you were to say finish it in an ex-sherry cask or an ex-port barrel or, heaven forbid, I don't know why anybody would, but you could finish it in a tequila barrel or something like that if you wanted to, as long as it's clearly labeled on the bottle. Bourbon finished in port barrel. That has to be there. That's by law. Again, one of those things that I said is the most regulated spirit out there. So what he did, he wanted to make something a little bit sweet for his wife. So we start off with the very first sample you had there, a small batch bourbon. We dump that out into a great big vat at 94 proof. And then we take the staves and we cut them. The staves are the little rungs in the barrel that you assemble to go around there. We take those and we cut them into little cubes, little hockey pucks, and we put them on a vine like you would see garlic or like you would see Brussels sprouts still on a stem. and then we dip that in a local honey. We wrap that, we leave that there for a few days, and then we wrap it in a cheesecloth. And once a day for 90 days, we take that bourbon-soaked oak, that honey bourbon-soaked oak, say that 3 times fast, and we dip that into the bourbon once a day for 90 days. So it's a secondary wood finish that will infuse a little bit of that honey flavor in there. If we were just to take a jar of honey and add 1 drop, we're not bourbon anymore. So that one we also do proof down a little bit lower at 80. It is, for me, it's a light kind of entry into the category. I'm used to cast strength 94 proof bourbon is what's for breakfast. So for some other people that might think it's a little bit hot or a little bit warm, don't worry, you'll get there. It's all good. It's all good. Baby steps. So that one is a lot of fun. It hit the market in July, in the middle of the pandemic. We thought we had enough of this bourbon to last us until January. We sold out in 6 days. We had no idea how big this was going to be. Be honey, no pun intended. And it just really, really blew up. So starting in January, that one's going to be available year-round around the country, or at least in all the 38 states that were maybe 39. I just found out we're distributed in Delaware. Anybody from Delaware? But we're coming in. I just found out we got into Michigan as well. So, I really do have the best job in the world. I get to not only make bourbon, but I get to travel around the country, meet bourbon fanatics, and pop their Garrison Brother cherry so they could have some Texas bourbon for the first time. I was in Kentucky not too long ago, and I just started laughing out loud hysterically, and everybody at the bar kind of looked at me like, this guy is like the Joker. He's a maniacal maniac. What's going on here? And I said, you have 8 Kentucky regulars sitting around the bar in Kentucky drinking Texas bourbon. I think this is awesome. They all kind of looked at me and said, it's good stuff. So super humbled to get that opportunity and see it out there. And I hope you liked it. If you can kind of maybe, I can't see y'all, but maybe by show of votes there, whose favorite was the first one? Was the small batch bourbon? And then whose favorite was the single barrel, and whose favorite was the honeydew?
Single barrel.
Single barrel. I see some single barrels. I see some number 1. So this just goes to show you that there's no such thing as the best. It really grinds my gears when I have people come up to me at festivals or tastings and go, which one's your best? I mean, is that your way of asking me politely which is the most expensive? I'll tell you what, the Spice Girls sold 50 million albums. I did not buy one. Best is a subjective term. The best is whatever you enjoy the most. If you don't enjoy our bourbon, I will not be offended. I get to travel around and spend the majority of my day in bars. I sit next to people drinking Michelob Ultra, and I swear to God, they look like they're enjoying themselves. Whatever you enjoy, have whatever you'd like. There's no such thing. So, it's all subjective. I mean, my grandma told me I was the best soccer player when I was 5 years old. She was so wrong. It's all subjective. Enjoy what you enjoy. Don't let anybody tell you how to drink your bourbon. Don't let anybody tell you how to enjoy your bourbon. And pretty much, unless you're going to mix it with White Claw, you're not going to have an issue with me either. So super appreciate your time. If there's any more questions or anything, you can get me on Instagram at Bourbon Provocateur, or Shane at GarrisonBros.com on email. And we'd love to get you all out there to dip some bottles and drink some bourbon and share some more stories with you. Super appreciate the time, and I hope you'll have a great end of the evening with the bourbon you got in your care packages there.
Awesome. Well, Shane, thanks a lot for your time. I appreciate it. That was a good history. I've not been a bourbon person, so this was more of an education than you know. I got some good friends that are bourbon, done the bourbon trail, tasted some good stuff, but never knew that, you can't do anything but water. That was the old rule for beer too. There was only supposed to be 4 things that went in beer. But I'm happy for the education. That was really good. And thanks again. To circle all the way back to everybody, we are here to help. I did put my phone number and email in the chat. We will be reaching back out to folks. I know there's a few people that didn't join. This is my last piece. This is the honey, and it does have a little bit of a warmer bite than the other two, which I kind of thought it would be simpler. The other two I thought were much smoother than the one that was designed to be smooth for the wife. But again, I mean, I really enjoyed this, but if anybody has any questions about what we learned in the first part, I'd be happy to help. If the second part about the bourbon, I'll have to bring on some new people or bring Shane back to give you the answers. Well, thanks for everybody. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it tonight. You know, we're going to wrap up a little bit early, which is good. But thanks everybody for your time, and hopefully we'll do this again. And this time maybe with a mixologist or something like that. So if you want to give your votes, that'd be a good reason to send me a note of what you'd like to see next. And then we'll go from there. Thanks a lot, and talk to you soon.